I am going to put, right now I have a white thread on the machine, and I'm going to take a second thread. I'm going to put a red thread onto my spool stand, and you'll be able to see me coming around in just a minute. And my white thread is threaded regular through my machine. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to use this second thread, and I'm going to thread it just like my first thread all the way through my machine as though it's the only thread there. So they're both doing the exact same thing. And excuse me. Now I'm down here with my second thread, and I need to get both of those threads through the eye of one needle, which is going to be tricky, and it's really tricky when somebody's watching you. I took off my foot, and I'm going to use this little needle threader, and supposedly I'm going to come in through the back. Notice the quiet while I'm doing this. I know you're all holding your breath at home. It's hard to get it through, but I'm going to get that needle threader. It does not want to go through for me today. I'm going to do what I'm going to tell you not to do. I'm going to try my needle threader real gently. And look at that, it worked. You didn't see me do that. Never ever use your needle threader with a double thread. If I was off camera, I would have taken this ankle piece off, and then I can get this needle threader right through the back of the needle. The problem was I was on too much of an angle to get it. So just take this ankle off, and then you'll be able to pull it through the back. And like I said, it's not a good idea to use your needle threader. The way your needle threader works, there's the eye of your needle, and then there's a small hook that comes down and it pulls through the eye of the needle. Your threads go in there, and then that hook pulls the threads back. And it works really well, but that tiny little wire in the needle threader can break, especially when you're doing something like two threads. I took my original N foot off. I'm going to use an open toe foot today. You can use the N foot or the J foot. Both of those have a hole that works for a zigzag stitch, that oval hole where the needle goes through. They work fine. I'm going to use an open toe embroidery foot. It's going to be a little easier for you folks to see me today. So I'm going to snap this on. Okay. And I have my two threads. I have a red and a white through my needle, and I'm going to put my foot down. A good habit to get into is foot down and then hit your needle down button if you have one. Otherwise, crank your needle down into your fabric and then hit your gas. I'm set on a serpentine stitch. And I'm going to change the angle of this camera just a little bit, like so. And I'm going to move to the middle a little more. And I'm going to sew along. And I'm going to stop. This machine nicely has a cutter. It snips my threads for me. I lift my foot, and look at that. Okay, I'm saying look at that. There we go. So it twists those two threads together. I chose red and white just because it's one of my favorite color combinations, especially when I'm doing Christmas things. It makes the cutest little candy canes. So two different colors of thread through one needle gives you an interesting look. The other thing it does, it's very fun for top stitching or quilting. If you don't have the color thread that you want, or you can't find a variegated that you like, pick two colors that work with what you're doing. So I could pick a light blue and a dark blue, and it would give me a really nice shaded look. And I can quilt with those double threads as well. The other thing is, if you're trying to match a stitch, match a particular color of thread, and you don't have the right one, you've got one that's a little light and one that's a little dark, put them both in, and they'll blend together, and they'll be a really nice match to what you're working on. So two threads are really fun, and they work with all kinds of decorative stitches. I'm going to grab a little sample that I have here. This is a a little floral stitch here that is a red and a green thread in at the same time. I've got red and green on all 3 of these samples. A little star stitch. It's just really a fun way to, again, put 2 threads through the eye of 1 needle. You just thread the machine twice and then manually thread, remember I said manually thread, your needle by using a little needle threader like this through the back. Take the ankle off and go through the back and pull your threads through. So that's how you do that. The next thing we're going to talk about for a minute before I switch to a double needle, I want to talk about variegated threads. Actually, I just changed my mind right in the middle of my presentation. I'm going to talk about variegated threads in a minute because I've got some samples to show you that I'll do at the end. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to switch to a double needle. A double needle looks like this. It has 1 shank that goes up into your machine and 2 needles all hooked together. All right. What I'm going to do, they come in a pack like this. This is, the size on here is 2.0, and that's the size that comes with your machine. Almost every machine comes with a double needle in with your accessories. That's a 2.0. There are wider widths, probably about 5 or 6 different sizes of widths that work for different things. The one thing that we're going to do today is we're going to use decorative stitches with a double needle. On those, you want to be sure that you're using the smallest, the 2.0 width, because those needles have to fit inside this little spot right here and move back and forth. If my needles are too wide apart, they're going to hit the edge of that foot. So a 2.0 will tell you, will fit inside the foot that you're working on. On this machine, it actually has a little button down here in the corner that tells you that you can use that needle for you can use a double needle for that stitch. So that's kind of a nice feature. So now I'm going to take my needle out. I've got my needle bar up here, and I'm going to loosen that little screw. When you take your needle in and out, don't unscrew it completely. Just loosen it so you can get your needle out. It doesn't have to be super, super tight, and you want it tight enough. Crank it tight with your fingers, but don't crank it so tight with a screwdriver that you can't get it off. That's a fairly small screw, and it can strip on you. So the double needle is just like any other needle. One side is rounded, the other side is flat. The flat goes to the back, and it goes up in just like any other needle. There we go, hard to see with the camera in my way. And I'm going to put that finger tight. And now, Cheryl's on the phone back there. Now I'm going to, this is going to be the hard part, I'm going to thread these 2 manually. I still have my 2 threads through the machine, threaded just the same. And we'll see, hey, look at that, I got one. That's a good start. Okay, there's one. And I'm going to take my other one. And you think this is hard to do at home. Try doing it with everybody watching you. And, oh, look at that. Pretty happy about that. Okay, so I've got both needles threaded. I'm going to take it and put it underneath my foot. Again, I have my open embroidery foot on. You can use either your N or your J foot, as I said earlier. They both have a large enough hole for the stitch to go through. What I have picked is a Serpentine Stitch, the same one that I did here with 2 threads in. This one is going to be with a double needle. So I'm going to put my foot down, put my needle down, and hit the gas. And what it's going to sew is 2 lines of stitching, one in red thread, one in white thread, right next to each other. I'm going to stop, hit my cutter, raise my foot, and look how cute that is. Fun little project. You can use two colors the same or two colors differently, and it makes a real cute little stitch. We did a quilt that we use the double needle for quilting, and I'm going to just ask Cheryl to get something for me while I keep talking at you. If you would grab the ocean quilt with the double stitch quilting, Brittany's with the whale on it, the sample, thank you. So I'm going to keep talking for a minute while Cheryl grabs that. We used that double thread serpentine stitch for quilting on a real sweet little quilt, and I should have grabbed it, and Cheryl's going to go get it. So what I'm going to show you now is some samples of stitches. Here is, back this up just a little bit. Okay, so here is one single needle with a single color thread. Next to it is a double needle, and I did two different colors of thread each time so you can see the difference in the stitching. This one is a little diamond type shape. My angle's not real good here. And then I did it in a double thread and then a scallop stitch. And then here, the serpentine that I just showed you, a little zigzag, multiple zigzag stitch, and then a blanket stitch. And here's Cheryl with our quilt. I want to give you a chance to look here. On the quilting, you can see we used the double needle. She used two colors of the same thread. She used a variegated thread just in a single. And then down here, you can see that real easily. So it's just fun. And that quilt is our little sea creatures. And we thought, what a fun way to quilt it. It kind of looks like seaweed coming up through, and that double needle just makes it extra fun. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go back to where I was there for just a second, talking about this sample. And I'm going to come aside here. This sample, you'll notice, lays real flat. The reason for that is we have stabilizer behind it. You need some type of stabilizer to support any type of decorative stitches. And I just had somebody ask if they could see the back of the quilt. Well, yes, we've got the whale on the back of the quilt. And the stitches, let's see, here's a double stitch. You get, it's not an exact, you don't get the double because there's only one bobbin thread, but it doesn't look bad. Looking for another double one here. They're pretty well hidden. Here we go. So we thread match our back, and the back looks just fine on a decorative stitch. Thank you for asking that. I'm going to go back to here for a second. I was just talking about stabilizers. This is a single layer of cotton. With only one layer of cotton, you will get some pucker in your decorative stitching. It's just a given. And this one is the first one that I did. And if you look at the edge of this, see how wavy this is along here? That does not have stabilizer in it. This one lays nice and flat. That had stabilizer behind it. On this I used, you can see I've started to tear some of it away. This is just an iron-on stabilizer. This one I used, I believe this is a Floriani iron-on Heat and Stay is the name of this stabilizer. Totally Stable is another one that we carry that's real nice. It is a tearaway, so it leaves nothing in your project. You can also use something like Shape Flex, which is an iron-on and stay-in type stabilizer. If you are doing it on a quilt, you don't need to worry about it. The batting and the backing are more than enough stabilizer. But if you're doing decorative stitching on a single layer of cotton, you want to use some type of decorative, sorry about that, you want to use some type of stabilizer on the back of your decorative stitches. So that's that. One of your handouts on our Daily Dose page today is going to be this tip sheet. Again, those who aren't familiar with our website, it's www.sewingbasket.biz, B as in business, I, Z as in zebra. And this is our little tip sheet on playing with two threads to remind you of what I talked about today. So that will be on the website. The last thing I want to talk about, you can see my quilt here in the background, It is actually a machine embroidery quilt called Feels Like Spring, but it is just a fun project, and it's one of my favorite samples for variegated threads. When you're using variegated thread, there's two different types. There are evenly variegated threads and uneven, okay? Even being every 6 inches it changes color. Say my thread is red, white, and blue. It does 6 inches of red, 6 inches of white, 6 inches of blue, and it repeats itself, which is a variegated. And when you're doing running stitches or other longer decorative stitches, it works great, looks nice. The one thing to remember is if it is evenly variegated, if you are stitching a satin stitch, it's going to look like a stripe because it has the exact same amount of red and then the same amount of white and the same amount of blue. So it's going to give you a striped look. And I'm going to come down here and show you the outside of this rose. There's a white and then kind of a peach and then a red, a darker red, and a burgundy and a peach and then a white, and it repeats over and over again. So that edge of that flower all the way around, it actually reads like a stripe. If I sewed that in a straight line, you would see that it was evenly spaced. Each one has the same amount of stitches with each color. The inside of these flowers, right here, that is done with the same variegated, it's done with a pink and white variegated thread, and it just keeps stitching those knots, and it looks like they're all different colors. It is actually a variegated thread, and it's just the way that the variegation hits on the stitches. These little purple clematis, you can see the same thing. This was a purple variegated thread, and as it's stitched back and forth, the color changes. That was done with this thread. This, back to the rose for a minute here, was done with this thread. And the inside of the roses were done with this thread. So it's really fun to see what things look like. The type of thread that is variegated, there's a brand called Sulky, and they're called blendables. And these are variegated for a funny name. The length of the stitching, the length of the color change is varied. So if it were a red, white, and blue thread, it might be 2 inches of red, 5 inches of white, 3 inches of blue, 6 inches of red, 1.5 inches of white, and it will keep switching through the process. So as you look at some of these, just unwrap this a little bit here. So these variegateds are, so you can see that thread, it changes as it moves along. Okay, so those are called Sulky blendables, and the variegation is different on each thing. I'm going to just take a second, and show you a few other things on this quilt. This again, this was a solid thread. This is the red variegated that was around the other roses. And these are solids. I've got a nice look over here of, this is funny, the fabrics are all different colors, and they run from a red and an orange and kind of a purple. When I picked those fabric colors, I had a couple people say, oh, those don't look like they go together. They were all different. What unifies them in this block is by using a solid thread around everything. It ties all those colors together. And this is my favorite block. These are little violets. This is the same variegated thread used on each center. They all look different because the variegation hits in a different location on every flower. And again, this quilt is called Feels Like Spring. It is by Smith Street Designs. It is an embroidery machine quilt. I will put that up on our website. We do have the patterns available. I hope you felt like you learned something today and had a little bit of fun. and thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon. One of these days we'll be talking about decorative stitches just for fun. Take care.